People have different opinions about how to do this, and I'm very much of the thinking, and my journalism is kind of centered on this, of, you know, I don't need to hit you on the head with a frying pan, but I need to try to gently draw you in and show you. And I think this is especially important right now because things are so polarizing. I think we need to, as individuals, emotionally mature, but also collectively as, societies and nations.
Today I'm coming to you from the Bosphorus in Istanbul in Turkey. And this week we're having a little bit of a departure from our usual show. We managed to catch up with Arwa Damon, who runs INARA, a charity, a non-NGO, working in Palestinian on the Gaza Strip, looking at the humanitarian crisis there. Arwa is an American Syrian, previously was a reporter for CNN, and so has a really unique perspective on what's going on in Palestine. And, we thought it'd be interesting to give a bit of perspective on this humanitarian crisis, and particularly how it affects people living there in terms of access to financial services and, just basic needs. So here is my reporting with Arwa Damon. Arwa Damon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brett King. My pleasure.
It was nice to hear you talk today, and I actually took some time before we're catching up now to take a look at some of the work you've done on CNN previously and things like that. The first thing I want to ask you is, you spend this time in these war-torn conflict areas. You've been in Syria, in Palestine, recently in Gaza. You spent time also in Afghanistan. So I want to have ask you, how do you, in the depth of these conflicts, how do you keep your mental health in good shape?
It's actually been a journey. I think, for the first probably 10, 15 years, not healthy coping mechanisms. And what has really helped me has been, not just the work, as we call it, but shifting my thinking. Because what I've now realized, and it's these small little moments, is that if you look for the light, because it's so hard to find and it's so hard to see, it can sink you even deeper. And I've come to this realization of I don't need the light.
Right.
I can tread water in the dark.
Okay.
The situations of extreme hopelessness that we see that are literally an arsenal are a weapon in the arsenal of war. It's this deliberate creation of situations that are so enormous, so hopeless, so helpless that you're driven into paralysis or apathy. I've realized that I don't need hope. Hope isn't my motivator. That's not why I keep doing what I do. And that realization gave me some of my power back. But in the more practical sense of it, EMDR worked really well for me. And I also started working with this guy, Simon, who does sort of mind-body balance and a lot of breath work. But, everyone has their own techniques for dealing with it. And I got 3 cats.
The 3 cats must help.
They
obviously.
do. They do.
Tell me about the nonprofit that you run and the work you're doing. So for people who aren't familiar.
Yeah, so it's called INARA, which in Arabic means ray of light, but it's the International Network for Aid, Relief, and Assistance. And I basically established it while I was still at CNN back in 2015, because by that point, I had seen so much. I'd been through so much, mostly in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan. And I kept coming across all these kids in these war zones that were injured and they weren't getting the medical treatment that they needed. And I was actually in a very dark place. And out of that came this idea of, well, hang on a second, maybe I can do something for these kids, and maybe I can build an organization that focuses on these cases that other charities are not providing treatment for. And that's what it initially really focused on, is medical and mental health treatment for children who have complex injuries. But since then, we've expanded into a much more sort of widespread, broad, very holistic approach. And we work in Afghanistan, Syria, Gaza, Egypt, Turkey, and we have had a couple of projects in Ukraine. But it's also because, when you spend that much time in these places, there's a few things that you realize. And I think for me, the big lesson has really been, this is so striking. People who have nothing are so generous with the little that they
Yeah.
have.
You mentioned that a couple of times.
Yeah, and to me, it's still mind blowing that someone who has just been displaced, who is just starting to, set up the scraps of their tent, would invite me in for a cup of
Yeah.
tea.
Yeah.
Or how, in Mosul in 2016, the Iraqi Special Forces unit I was with, we were ambushed by ISIS and we ended up sheltering with these civilians. And, literally, I mean, the soldiers were like bleeding out in this courtyard. The women and children were hiding in a dark corner. All I could see was the whites of their eyes. And the head of the household went and made fried eggs for everybody because no matter what, we were still guests in his house, right? And you see all these moments, and then when you come out of this space, your relationship with everything around you changes. My relationship, especially after Gaza, because it was so extreme, with food, with water, with a hot shower, with my bed, is very different to what it was before.
Mm.
And that really ends up being sort of a big driver in wanting to do and understanding the value of a small act of kindness, because I haven't forgotten the small acts of kindness that have been bestowed upon me. And I know that people don't forget those small acts of kindness. And what's so striking about it is then, you look at the people who have wealth, and a lot of them are not
No, they're
generous
not
with it at
kind.
all. And
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. You mentioned going to Gaza and people greeting you because they hadn't seen you and asking about your well-being.
I know that. I mean, that was just nuts, because I think that was on my second trip in. And so INARA, my charity, we focus on sort of tent clusters. They're on the smaller scale that other organizations don't necessarily have within their area of operations. So they know us. Plus, the team is constantly going back there because we're doing all these mental health activities with the kids. And yeah, so I had rotated out and I was coming back in 2 months later. And the women were all like, Arwa, where have you been? We missed you so much. We were so worried about you. And I'm
Wow.
sitting there going, I mean,
Yeah.
but I was
So
out.
powerful. Yeah.
I was out. And you were worried about me.
But I mean, th- i- do you feel like when you come back to, quote unquote civilization from those, is are you frustrated that there's such lack of awareness of how these people are treated, and that as a tool? Because if people were actually embedded in this and actually experienced what these other people were going through, maybe we'd see more compassion flow through.
And the number of times, like throughout my journalistic career, but then also now in the humanitarian space, where I've thought to myself, like, if I could bring everyone into this one
Right.
moment, into this one tiny little moment, and it's not even a scary moment, it's not a moment when a bomb's going off, then they would understand and things would change. And as a journalist, I tried to focus a lot of my like reporting and my storytelling on that, of really trying to bring people into the experience, and kind of, in the humanitarian space, like on my social media, I still try to do that. And I have a tendency to fault myself. Um, and so if we have not been able to draw people in, somehow we're doing something wrong. Uh, but there is a lot of it, it's frustration, but it's also frustration with myself,
Mm.
in the sense that I should be able to figure out a way to break down whatever these barricades are that are left, that aren't allowing people to see each other as humans.
Yeah.
And there is anger. And that's kind of like what my own personal sort of mental health journey has been. Throughout the course of my career for a very long time, I translated a lot of, the sad, because it's extraordinarily sad, and the hurt that you're seeing other people go through, and all of those sort of complex tornado emotions. I used to translate everything into anger.
Mm.
And so the work that kind of like I did on myself has helped a lot with that. And I mean, no, but I mean, anyone who tells you that it's easy is either lying to themselves or lying, and you wouldn't want it to be easy. You wouldn't want to go into a space like the ones that, I've been in, and come out and be fine.
I mean, I want to talk a little bit tactically about, you know, access to basic services. And one of the things we focus on in Breaking Banks podcast is financial inclusion and access to finances. But when you have, we've heard stories about doctors and lawyers and professional people from Syria, for example, displaced by the civil war, getting on a boat, with their kids, trying to get to Greece or something.
Yeah, I
like this.
covered that a lot.
Yeah, and you have these people who would be in their society pretty well off financially, and then suddenly, they're left without any financial resources. And for those in Gaza, I imagine that they don't have ATMs they go to and get cash out. So how do people survive financially in these scenarios?
So, I mean, it's so hard. It's inexplicably hard. Uh, from the practical perspective, like where does money actually come from? Um, so up to a certain point, people had some cash. Right now, today, for example, if you're going to get cash, a lot of it is actually remittances
Right.
from abroad. If you don't have a salary, right? And then who actually has a salary right now in Gaza? Some of the journalists do if they're contracted by a network. The humanitarian community does. So, like my staff has a salary. Um, some of the doctors, the medics, and that kind of a thing. That there isn't really, industry isn't there. But then people have people overseas. And so it ends up going through sort of this de facto black market system.
The hawala.
The hawala, exactly, except they take 40%.
40%.
Yes. So basically, it's one example. If you have someone who's managed to get out of Gaza, right? And let's say they're getting cash assistance outside, which is maybe, $200 a month. And they're sending half of that to their family members in Gaza. They're sending them $100, but that family member is only getting 60. And remember, we're talking about Gaza, where at certain points in time, when fresh vegetables was available, $60 would get you maybe 2 kilos of fresh vegetables. A tent, if you're going to end up, buying one because it's available on the commercial market for whatever reason, that's $1,000. And so the amounts of money that we're talking about people trying to survive on are absolutely absurdly low.
That's insane. And yeah, like this is where you understand that these are the limits of our current system in terms of our ability to absorb shocks to the system.
And some people have wanted to sort of set up a sort of virtual money wallet thing, but for that, what do you need?
Power.
Yeah,
you need phones.
Phones. So, and so, you think Gaza, right?
Internet.
So how are people charging their cell phones?
Yeah.
So what some people have done as sort of a small business is they were able to save their solar panels. Gaza used to have a lot of solar panels because even before electricity was cut. And so some people set up charging stations where it's one solar panel and then a whole charging station, and then they charge people to charge their phones. But then you need the connectivity.
Yeah.
The internet system,
the first thing they're going to do to stop coordinated attacks is take out telecommunications.
Exactly. And so, your normal, 3G, 4G, whatever it is, doesn't work there. And so what some people would do when they were trying to get those videos out is they would crawl very close to the Israeli border or as close as they could to try to get that signal. Or, for example, why does the press congregate at the hospitals? Because they can get onto the hospital Wi-Fi, right? And then there's a couple of random, internet cafes. But I mean, it's a cafe in the rubble that have cropped up with people that are still able to get their systems on. But then there's also problems with the fiber lines. And so at one point, the line that was in the north had been hit by the Israelis. And the international NGO community was only actually just in the last few days able to get permission to go up and fix that line. And that's why Gaza City has had very poor internet connectivity. So there's all these factors that come into play when you're trying to look for solutions for the population there.
That's insane. All right. Well, today I did a session on, technology disruption with AI.
Fascinating.
Thank you very much. And, we are at the moment seeing, we've seen in the Ukraine-Russia conflict increased use of drone warfare in particular. And it seems like it's going to be getting easier and easier for remote operation and autonomous operation in war zones. So, given the problem that you've talked about with people being connected with what's going on, or disconnected rather from what's going on, and, thinking of it as another problem, the potential for this autonomous warfare just to come into these places and do untold damage seems to be.
I mean, it's already come into play in Gaza. Plus 962 is this amazing outlet. Sorry, plus 972 is this amazing outlet. And they looked into this, and actually a couple of other organizations have looked into it, including Israeli publications. And basically, the Israelis have been using artificial intelligence technology. One is called Lavender, and the other is called Where's Daddy? And Where's Daddy actually tracks the target to their home.
Oh man, that's
Whereas, I have throughout the course of my, journalism career, spent a lot of time in U.S. military
yeah.
ops rooms. And, generally, you attempt to take out your target when you're going to cause the least amount of civilian
Collateral damage. Yeah.
collateral damage, which I hate that word, collateral damage. But yeah, no, so Lavender and Where's Daddy?
All right. Well, on the flip side, though, do you think there is a use for AI in mitigating some of these issues, dealing with some of these humanitarian crises better?
I mean, it's hard to see how it could play into a context where you don't have connectivity. If you look, Gaza is one thing, but if you look at a conflict like Sudan,
Mm.
where, there is even less connectivity actually for these populations that are being displaced because of the remote and vastness of it than there was for the population in Gaza, then how does AI work in those circumstances? Or is AI something that we can tap into for solutions when you're not connected and when the experience is so unique that in theory, whatever needs to get plugged into AI, you can't actually plug into AI. I mean, I'm sitting here racking my brain right
Yeah.
now being like, okay, so let's say I plugged into AI. I have vegetables in southern Gaza. I have hygiene kits in northern Gaza. I have a soap crisis. I want to move stuff from the south to the north and vice versa, but Israel controls the Nitzrim corridor and can't get me across that. I don't see how AI solves that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. Um, in terms of the work that you do, you do a lot of reporting from these zones and raise awareness of this. But how do we get more consensus mechanisms? How do we get more people involved? I mean, I guess if you knew how to solve this problem, you would. But like given the incredible how we are seeing viral campaigns on social media and these sorts of things going, surely we should be able to mobilize some of this stuff to build consensus, but we seem to be getting more and more divided politically and in terms of opinions. So I guess do you have some insights on how we can get more people together on these issues?
Look, people have different opinions about how to do this, and I'm very much of the thinking, and my journalism is kind of centered on this of, you know, I don't need to hit you on the head with a frying pan, but I need to try to gently draw you in and show you. And I think this is especially important right now because things are so polarizing. I think we need to, as individuals, emotionally mature, but also collectively as, societies and nations. And, this might seem a bit off topic, but if we look at some of our sort of gut reactions to, and you could be on either side of any spectrum of this, but you will have a gut reaction to something that goes against your perception and or your believed truth. And that gut reaction will cause you to close up.
Right.
If we become more aware of what we're closing up to and deliberately force ourselves to open up to it, then we can start to get closer together. And again, understanding someone's context does not mean agreeing with their actions. But if we refuse to understand a context, then we can't alter actions and or reactions. And a lot of this goes into epigenetics, which is the study of intergenerational traumas and how we're basically not born blank slates.
Yeah.
We're born carrying all of this historical trauma that doesn't change our DNA, but it changes how our DNA interacts with each other and then interacts with the world. And I think a lot of it requires a responsibility on our part to try to understand our own emotional reactions and be more cognizant of how we're expressing them. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to just go off on these hysterical, crazy trains and just rip ourselves apart.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You talked about, these very human reactions, people being compassionate towards you and so forth. So you've been in some pretty crazy places. And I mean, I look at that and say you must have incredible internal fortitude and strength to
The
cope with this. But
the
I guess
late
learn.
great Marie Colvin, extraordinary journalist, one of my idols, she and like her era of, female frontline correspondents broke the glass ceiling for my generation. She was killed in Syria.
Mm,
But she says, courage is not being afraid to be afraid.
yeah,
And so, I'm not fearless,
yeah,
but I do have courage.
yeah. Having said that, do you observe that these people are in extraordinarily stressful situations, but they're just normal people?
They are, and I mean, look, there's a big difference between, whether it's journalism or humanitarian. Like, we go in and out, and we're doing it by
Mm,
choice. Um, they don't have a choice. They don't have the ability to leave, and especially when we're talking about, like, Gaza specifically, all these other areas that I've been in, even the sieges that were happening in certain areas of Syria or, ISIS, in Iraq, there was always an escape route, albeit one that could be, like, practically suicidal, but it was always there. It was always that option, and then as front lines advanced, then there was that moment where if you'd survived up until that point, you would pop out,
yeah.
and that's it. You could breathe and it was over, but Gaza doesn't have any of that. And, you know, when you actually go there, though, and spend time there and realize that in the middle of this crazy, people are still holding on to laughter
Mm,
because laughter is resistance. People are still holding on to their dignity because holding on to your dignity is resistance. Then that's when you really understand what it means to be a kind and compassionate human.
mm,
I mean, I often ask myself, as we all should, if I had children, if my kid was starving and my neighbors got a bag of flour, would I go and steal that from them?
yeah.
Would that level of social disintegration happen around us? And I keep remembering, the Americans during COVID and the toilet paper run.
Oh, yeah.
And
Aussies too, by the way.
did you?
Yeah.
And I think about, the people in Gaza, but also in a lot of these other areas that I've been to and how no, they didn't disintegrate like that.
What's a little, I just remember this. I did a book called The Rise of Techno-Socialism, and I spoke about COVID impact on communities. And food wastage went up by 40% in the United States because people were hoarding food and they couldn't use it. It's just insane. It's just insane.
I mean, there's kids in Gaza, right? And I'm talking like the height of the starvation. And so we at one point managed to like find enough supplies to do a hot meal. But we were calling them hot meals then, but literally it was just rice because there was nothing that you could buy to actually put on the rice. And so, our truck drives up and the kids are starving. And you would think, like anywhere else in the world, a starving child, when they see food, what do? They run, they grab, they shove it in their own mouth. These kids went and helped our team unload the truck and
Mm,
pile the food and then took their share and helped them actually with the distribution. Because even a child in a place like that understands that you can't just look out for the
yeah.
individual, you've
Yeah.
got to look out for the whole.
Incredible. So listen, I'm respectful of your time.
That's
That I
all right.
really appreciate it. For people listening to the cast or watching this on YouTube, how can we help INARA? What can we do to help you and
the work that you're doing in these places?
I mean, look, obviously, donate, 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 right? And there is this notion out there that, somehow because there's this Trump, ceasefire deal or that it's over, or there's this impression that, well, nothing's really getting in properly, that we are spending the money that gets donated to us. All organizations are. But frankly, like, even if it's not INARA, like, whatever you have that you can give, no matter how hopeless or helpless you might feel, donations do make a difference. And if you can't donate, I mean, look, there's small scale fundraisers that can be organized, getting, children actively involved, but then also talking about it, creating spaces where people can talk about it, just making sure that we keep the conversation going. Because right now, my personal big fear is in the way that we accepted Gaza's pre-October 7th situation as the status quo. And Gaza was a prison back then. And nothing was going in and out without Israel's approval. And the living conditions were extraordinarily difficult. And we all lamented the fate of Gaza. And it was like,
Sure.
oh, the poor thing and the poor Palestinians there, blah, blah, blah. We can't let this, what we're seeing right now, today's reality, become that new accepted normal status quo. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to make sure that the spotlight stays on the situation there, and not just on Gaza, but, on the West Bank too.
Yeah. Arwa Damon, thanks for joining us on The Futurists and Breaking Banks. I applaud the work you do. I think it's incredible to see someone dedicated to putting themselves in dangerous situations to help others, and we're very grateful for the work you do.
No, I'm grateful. I appreciate it. You know what I mean? Here's something else that people can do, right? Like, this is a new space for me. It's a new audience. And,
Yeah, sure.
you never know. There's so much that we can do that we don't even know we can do.
All right, well, you heard it there. So thanks, guys. Get on and help us out.